In October 1979, a man named Paul Volcker did something nobody dared to do. As chairman of the Federal Reserve of the United States, he raised the official interest rate to levels that seemed insane. In June 1981, the rate reached 20%. 20%. Imagine trying to buy a house with a 20% mortgage. Imagine taking out a business loan at that rate. The American economy entered its worst recession since the Great Depression. Unemployment shot up to 10.8%. Businesses went bankrupt. Families lost their homes. Farmers lost their farms. But Volcker had a goal: to kill inflation. And it worked. Inflation, which had reached nearly 15% in March 1980, fell below 3% by 1983. A single number, changed by a single man, transformed the world's largest economy. That is the story of the official interest rate. The rate that rules them all. We have seen what interest is and how compound interest works. But there is one interest rate that sits above all others. It is not set by the market. Not set by a commercial bank. It is set by a central bank. And when it goes up or down, everything else moves with it. Today we are going to understand how that mechanism works. What the official rate is, how its effect reaches your mortgage and your savings, and why a handful of people meeting in a room can change the economic fate of millions. The official interest rate, also called the policy rate, is the rate at which a central bank lends money to commercial banks. Or, in some systems, the rate at which banks can deposit their money at the central bank. Think of it this way. If your bank needs money overnight, it can borrow from the central bank. The price it pays for that loan is the official rate. In the United States it is called the federal funds rate. In the Eurozone, it is called the main refinancing operations rate. In the United Kingdom, it is called the bank rate. The names change, but the idea is the same. It is the base price of money in an economy. And the key word is base. Because commercial banks do not lend to you at the official rate. They lend at a higher rate. They take the official rate, add a margin to cover their costs and profit, add another margin for the risk that you might not repay, and the result is the rate that appears on your mortgage. If the official rate is 1%, perhaps your mortgage is 3%. If the official rate rises to 4%, your mortgage might jump to 6%. The movement is transmitted, like a wave. Economists call this the transmission mechanism. And it works in a chain. First link, the central bank raises the official rate. This makes money more expensive for commercial banks. Second link, commercial banks raise the rates they charge their customers. Mortgages, consumer loans, business loans, everything gets more expensive. Third link, since borrowing is more expensive, people borrow less. Fewer mortgages means fewer home purchases. Fewer business loans means less investment, less hiring, less growth. Fourth link, as demand falls, prices tend to slow. Inflation moderates. In the opposite direction it works the same way. If the central bank lowers the rate, loans become cheaper, people spend more, businesses invest more, the economy reactivates. But inflation can also accelerate. It is an enormously delicate balancing act. Raising too much can plunge the economy into recession. Lowering too much can unleash inflation. Central bankers permanently walk a tightrope. When the European Central Bank began operating in January 1999, it faced a challenge no central bank had faced before. It had to set a single interest rate for 11 different economies. The initial rate was 3%. But the Eurozone economies were not the same. Germany needed a different rate from the one Spain needed. Ireland was growing at full speed. Portugal was slower. A single interest rate for all was like forcing people of different sizes to wear the same coat. In April 1999, the ECB lowered the rate to 2.5%. It was its first major decision. And it already reflected the fundamental tension of the project: what was good for one economy could be bad for another. That tension has not disappeared. It is one of the structural challenges of the euro. And when the 2008 crisis arrived, followed by the European sovereign debt crisis, that challenge became painfully and visibly evident. Inside central banks there is a constant debate. And it is usually expressed with an avian metaphor: hawks versus doves. The hawks prioritize controlling inflation. They believe inflation is the greatest danger for an economy, and that keeping it low must be the primary objective, even if that means high rates, less growth, and more unemployment in the short term. The doves prioritize employment and growth. They believe a little inflation is an acceptable price if in return more people are working, more businesses are investing, and more prosperity is shared. Neither side is right and the other wrong. It is a matter of priorities and of reading the economic moment. Volcker was the supreme hawk. He accepted a devastating recession to crush inflation. Alan Greenspan, his successor, was more dovish. He kept rates low during the 1990s to foster growth. There is even an attempt to turn this decision into a mathematical formula. It is called the Taylor Rule, proposed by economist John Taylor in 1993. The rule suggests that the interest rate should rise when inflation is above target and when the economy is growing above its potential, and fall in the opposite case. But in practice, no central bank follows the Taylor Rule to the letter. Decisions always involve human judgment, uncertainty, and politics. The Hawks versus Doves debate renews itself every time a monetary policy committee meets. After the financial crisis of 2008, the world's major central banks did something unprecedented. They lowered interest rates to virtually zero. The Federal Reserve set its rate at a range of 0 to 0.25%, and kept it there for 7 years, from December 2008 to December 2015. The European Central Bank went further. In June 2014, it became the first major central bank to implement negative rates. Yes, negative. Banks had to pay the ECB to deposit money with it. It was like charging someone to keep their money in a safe. The Bank of Japan did the same in January 2016. The logic was that if you charged banks for holding idle money, you would force them to lend it. And if money flowed, the economy would reactivate. But negative rates generated unexpected problems. European banks saw their profit margins eroded. The direct cost of maintaining reserves at the ECB reached 15 billion euros per year. And the effects on the real economy were more modest than expected. Despite nearly a decade of negative rates, growth in Europe and Japan was anemic. Inflation stayed below the 2% target. It was not monetary policy that finally brought inflation back, but the disruptions of the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, which sent energy and food prices soaring. In 2022, central banks began raising rates rapidly to break that new inflation. After a decade at zero or below, the main tool was back in force. There is a concept that financial markets watch obsessively: the yield curve. It works like this. When a government issues debt, it offers different maturities. It can issue bonds at 3 months, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years. Normally, the longer the maturity, the higher the interest it pays. Because the longer the time, the more uncertainty. If you plot these rates on a graph, with maturity on the horizontal axis and the interest rate on the vertical, you get the yield curve. Under normal conditions, the curve rises from left to right. Short-term bonds pay less than long-term ones. But sometimes the curve inverts. Short-term bonds pay more than long-term ones. And when that happens, economists get nervous. Because an inverted curve has historically preceded almost every American recession of the last 50 years. Why? Because an inverted curve means investors expect rates to fall in the future. And rates fall when the economy weakens. It is a signal that the market believes difficult times are coming. It is not a perfect prediction. It does not always get it right. But it is one of the most respected indicators in the financial world. The official interest rate seems like something very remote. A decision made in a government building by people you will never meet. But its consequences reach every household. When rates rise, families with variable rate mortgages see their monthly payments spike. In Spain, where historically many mortgages have been linked to the Euribor, an ECB rate increase is felt directly in the monthly bill. Families who could pay their mortgage when rates were at zero suddenly find themselves in difficulty when they rise to 4%. When rates fall, savers suffer. Older people who depend on interest from their savings to supplement their pension see that interest disappear. During the decade of zero rates, many European and Japanese retirees saw their income from savings reduced to practically nothing. And when rates change abruptly, the most vulnerable are always those with the least margin. A family living at the limit of its income can survive a rise of 1 percentage point. A rise of 4 or 5 can push them into default. Monetary policy is, perhaps, the most powerful force in economics. And most people do not know how it works. 3 ideas to take away from this episode. First, the official interest rate is the base price of money in an economy. It is set by the central bank, and all other rates move with it. When it rises, loans become more expensive, spending falls, and inflation moderates. When it falls, the opposite happens. Second, there is no consensus on what the right rate is. Hawks want high rates to control inflation. Doves want low rates to boost employment. Both positions have legitimate arguments and real consequences. Third, the tool has limits. When rates reach zero, the central bank loses its main weapon. Negative rates were an experiment that lasted nearly a decade, with debatable results. Central banks raise rates to fight a monster that can devour your savings, your wages, and the stability of an entire society. That monster has a name you all know: inflation. But what exactly is inflation? Why do prices rise? Who benefits and who is destroyed? That, next time.